Good evening. Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to open this evening's lecture by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which this university stands. My name is Professor Nils Ollerkans and I am the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics. And it's my very, very great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to hear Professor Jane Liu present her inaugural professorial public lecture, Doing Business in Asia, One Size Does Not Fit All. I extend a warm welcome not only to all the guests in this lecture theatre, but also to guests from around the world who will watch the online vodcast in the coming weeks and indeed months. This lecture forms part of the faculty's public lecture series. We invite you to sign up to receive advance notification of upcoming public lectures through which the faculty invites members of the public to attend or watch online, all free of charge. You can sign up using the sheets at the entrance to this lecture theatre or online via the faculty website. At the Faculty of Business and Economics, we believe that it is the duty of the academic world to undertake impartial research that can affect government and business policy, educate the next generation, and furthermore, and very importantly, share knowledge freely with the general public. And through our public lecture series, the faculty makes our cutting-edge research accessible to all interested parties. Tonight, Professor Jane Liu will present her inaugural professorial public lecture. And I am absolutely delighted to see so many people here tonight to hear her speak. Jane was appointed the James Riady Chair in Asian Business and Economics in 2013 and subsequently appointed as Director of the faculty's Centre for Asian Business and Economics. The James Riady Chair in Asian Business and Economics is funded through a generous donation by Dr. James Riady, an alumnus of this faculty. The objective of supporting teaching and research that drives a deeper understanding of doing business in the Asian region. And we are very grateful for Dr. Riady's vision and generosity. To support this chair, the Centre for Asian Business and Economics was launched in 2014 as part of the faculty's wider strategy for enhancing its presence in the Asia-Pacific region and developing our research and teaching capabilities. The Centre has since launched an emerging scholar exchange scheme as well as a seminar series on Asian business. The Centre has attracted generous funding from alumni and friends. I would like to acknowledge the presence of many of those donors here tonight. And the faculty invite you to participate in the Centre's activities through attendance at events and seminars or through your own generosity. It is my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce Professor Jane Liu. She received her PhD from the Richard Ivey School of Business, which is located at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. Her research centres on international strategy with a focus on emerging market firms and their internationalisation. Jane has published in leading academic journals such as the Academy of Management Journal and the Journal of International Business Studies. She's a senior editor of the Asia Pacific Journal of Management and Journal of World Business. And she also serves on the editorial boards of various other leading international journals. Prior to joining academia, Jane worked in senior management positions in a major international trading company and in Rabobank in China. Please join with me in welcoming Professor Jane Liu.
Okay, thank you very much, Nils, for the very comprehensive introduction. So I don't have much to say. I don't want to repeat what Nils has already mentioned, but I do want to extend a a further word of welcome to everyone who's here today to join me in this event. And I want to thank you because for many of you, you have probably more exciting options because there's a choice for you whether to be here or not tonight. But for me, it's not a choice. It's a must, as I was told. I must give this lecture. But I do have some choices. I have a choice over my topic. So I pondered over a few options. I explored also a few with Lauren. And I decided on this topic, on doing business in Asia. I feel it's an appropriate topic because it fits well with the title of the chair position and also fits well with the focus of the center, which I'm leading. So that's why I chose this topic. But I know it's also a challenging topic because many of you probably have heard the similar topics before. But I believe that all speakers, they approach this topic with a unique perspective. And given my background, I feel there's some value I can add tonight through sharing with you the diversity of Asia. So my research, as Niels has mentioned, focuses on international strategy with a focus on emerging market firms. So my discussion on Asia is different from my colleagues. So my analysis of the Asian institutional environment is not going to predict economic development like economists do, or try to predict government change as some of the political scientists do. My focus is on how these differences in the institutional environment is going to impact firm performance and how firms should formulate strategies to handle the challenges in the environment. So that will be my focus. And another differentiating factor is the delivery, because when I conduct my classes, I like to be interactive, but this is a little bit challenging to be interactive with such a large group, but I still want to try. So during my lecture, I may have some questions for the audience. I may call on individuals to answer, but do not need to worry, most of you are safe, because I do not know your names. But for those I know names, especially my colleagues, you are the likely victims. Okay, so having discussed the context of the talk, let's move on to my talk. So today I'm going to cover two important dimensions of institutional environment. One is economic environment, and the other is political environment. We all know how important they are because they are at the background of every business transaction. And I'm going to talk about these two aspects of environment in three ways. So first of all, I'll invite you to have a historical view of Asia's development along these two dimensions. And then after we had a historical view of these two dimensions, we're going to have some more detailed discussion on each of those. And then finally, time permitting, you're controlling, time permitting, I'm happy to share with you some of the findings from my research on what kind of strategies are appropriate for Asian market. So that's a plan for tonight. Okay, so first of all, let's start the journey, the time journey. Okay, so let me explain a little bit about this map. Let me see which side, maybe this side. So this is a Gapminder map of the whole world, but it represents the world in bubbles. Okay, so you can see the color. The color represents the geographic location. The red color is East Asia and Pacific. So Australia is the red color. And the size of the bubble indicates the size of population. So obviously you can guess this is China and that's India. So that's the size of population. Okay, so today we're going to talk about two dimensions of environments. One is the economic dimension, the other is the political dimension. So I chose two indicators. So for the economic environment, I chose GDP per capita. So that's a very well-known indicator for economic environment, about economic development in particular countries. So this is income per person as measured by GDP per capita. And the other measure is about the political environment. So I chose the measure that developed by the Center for Systematic Peace. So they have a measure on policy and on polity system. So they have some scores about the level of democracy in those countries. So the highest is 10, the lowest is -10. So that's the score. So this is the overall, the place of all the countries on this map. So where do you think Australia should be? The top right, right? So this is more or less most countries in the OECD countries are more or less at this corner. Okay, so I'm going to choose some countries. We cannot choose too many because otherwise it becomes very messy. You'll see when it starts to move, it becomes very messy. So we have to selectively choose some countries. Okay, so I will first show you China. So we're always talking about China, right? And then I'm going to also show you Australia. Why? Because I'm not going to interfere because China and Australia will not meet on this map. So they do not have any intersections here. It's difficult to find Australia. I have to click here. China is easy to find. Okay, now what we're doing is we're turning the clock back. I said that it's a time machine, right? So this is our time machine. We turn the clock back. So we turn the clock back, and then starting from 1800. So 1800, we cannot find Australia here. See, Australia disappeared. Okay, I just had a quick discussion with our economic historian, and we're debating when Australia should enter this map. I know it's debatable, but here we just take this for granted, okay? It must have some good reasons to enter a particular time. Okay, now let's see how China has evolved along the economic dimension and also the political environment dimension. So if we know a little bit about China history, at that time, should be the Qing dynasty, right? So that's empire. So China moved backward. Okay, so the 18th century was one of China's most turbulent periods, rocked by internal uprising, natural disasters, and the encroachments of the West. As a result, China actually went backward in economic development. It's not moving forward. Okay, we still cannot find Australia. Let me see, now it's getting there. Oh, Australia appeared. So Australia appeared, according to this map, 1901. I think that was when the parliament had a meeting in Melbourne. Actually, it was the first parliament meeting in Melbourne. And Australia becomes a federation. I think that's the time, okay? I know it's up to debate, but let's just take this for granted for the time being. Okay, China, you can see here, had a very short period of democracy. So that's 1912. So what happened was at that time, there was the fall of the empire, the Qing dynasty, and the foundation of the Republic of China, 1912. But this democracy has a very short lifespan. It's only 1 year. It's only 1 year. After 1 year, the founding father, the first president, Sun Yat-sen, passed away. And Yuan Shikai, a statesman and a general, took over the power. So he had a dream, and his dream was to reinstate monarchy. And he did succeed, become an emperor, but only for 83 days. So that was what you observe here. So 1912, then dropped. Okay, so although his attempt was ultimately a failure, but it set back the Chinese republican cause and fractured China into a period of conflict between various local warlords. So you see China will move down again. So now it's at the bottom of the world. So what happened is, this is 1937. So that was the all-out wars with Japan began. So from 1937 to 1945, so that was the end of the Second World War. So China was at the bottom of the world, and both in terms of democracy and economic development. Then after 1945, we had a 3-year internal war between the nationalist government and the communist government, right? And in the end, the communist government won and founded the People's Republic of China in 1949. And then China started some economic development, but again, went backward. So that period was the Cultural Revolution. So China went backward. Then was the open door policy, and China moved forward steadily. Okay, so that's between the Australia and China. You can see Australia was one single line, right? One single line. So I just think as an economic historian, have a much easier job or easier life in Australia than compared to counterparts in Asia. Okay, so now let's have a look at the other ones. Another country which is very interesting, I find very interesting, is Japan. So actually Japan started from the same place as China in 1900, but they managed to meet Australia. Okay, so we'll see Japan. So that's Japan. So Japan, China started roughly around the same place in 1800. Let's see how it moved. So unfortunately, my Japanese colleague, Sachiko, is not here, right? Sachiko here? Not here. Then I have to do the explanation. Okay, so that was, I think, that was when the arrival of black ships, which forced from the West, that forced Japan to open its door. Japan was, in the past, for 250 years, had a very closed market, and then it was forced to open its market. So that's 1853 to this period of time. Oh, sorry, I lost Japan. Okay, here. Okay, Japan had the most dramatic movements. So this is one period, and then the second period is the Meiji under the Meiji regime. So they had the industrialization and the modernization of Japan, and of course at the same time Japan expanded and became a powerhouse in the world. So there was lots of invasion, and that's 1945. 1945, and there was the occupation by the Allied force. And Japan, 1947, Japan, they passed the constitution that passed the sovereignty from the empire to the people. So Japan went all the way to democracy and then economic development. Okay, so that's Japan. Then here I have one interesting country at this corner. It's part of Asia. So this looks like an outlier, right? So which country do you think that could be? Yeah, that's Singapore. Okay, so let's have a look at Singapore. And Singapore, actually, I found this, there are the 4 little dragons in Asia. So who are the little dragons? Singapore is one. Taiwan. Hong Kong. South Korea, right? So these are the 4 little dragons. They had experienced very fast economic growth in the last 50 years, and they were put together as little dragons, okay? So I cannot find Hong Kong here. Hong Kong is not a country, okay? I cannot find Hong Kong here, but I can find these other 3 countries. So to some extent, they are relatively homogeneous, right? Because they all started around the same time and achieved very fast economic growth. But we can have a look at a pattern, even for this homogeneous group, relatively homogeneous group, their development pattern is very different. There's Singapore. That's South Korea. And Taiwan. And here, they don't start from 1800. They start more recently, 1948. Okay, there are lots of ups and downs, and we don't have time to go through each country, but what I want to show you is the different development patterns, right? You can see from, especially if you compare Singapore, so that's Singapore. Singapore, that's where Singapore started, and it dropped all the way, so that's 1965, and then economic development. And South Korea has the most events, the assassination, martial law, so that's ups and downs. But in general, you can see some improvement in democracy and then economic development, some improvement in democracy and then economic development. And Taiwan is more or less the same. So there was Chiang Kai-shek, then when he died, his son, so there was some improvement in democracy, then this is a Li Denghui, so then it's the pattern. So the patterns are not necessarily the same, but they all achieved economic development. Okay, so that's the world map I want to show you. The conclusion I want to draw is, first of all, that Asia is a very complicated region. Most of the countries has a very long history. So when we think of their current situation, sometimes we need to bring the history back and to consider these things from a more temporal pattern. And the second is the development pattern varies a lot among different countries. So that also increased the complexity of doing business there. Okay, so now let's move on to the other parts of my lecture. So for the agenda, I already discussed the agenda, so I won't repeat those there. So I just showed you the development pattern of Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, right? Then, of course, there's Hong Kong. But it's not including in that map, but I can collect information myself. So I collect that information. So these are the little dragons. Okay, I think we all know Asia, and especially those 4 little dragons, right? So can you tell me which is which? Do we have anyone from South Korea or anyone from Hong Kong, from any of those? Or you have very extensive experience there? Do we have any volunteers? Do we have any volunteers? Singapore is A? Okay, we got Mon said Singapore is A. Do you want to continue your guess? Singapore is A. Let's. Oh, okay. 2 extremes now. Then how about B? Anyone? South Korea. Then C is what? Which one? Hong Kong, I heard. Taiwan. C is Taiwan. So I have all kinds of guesses, right? So what I want to illustrate here is, even for those countries we think we know, this is a very simple GDP composition, right? So GDP, we all know GDP. So I decompose GDP by the three primary sectors. One is the agriculture, the other is the manufacturing, and then service. These are the three primary sectors. So if we think we understand these countries, we should know what's this basic GDP composition. But here we have a variety of guesses. Okay, so here is the answer. The first one is Taiwan. I don't know how many of you got it correct. Okay, I think the way to look at this is, first of all, I think you divide this into two. Singapore and Hong Kong, obviously, they have very, very almost negligible part agriculture. So these are almost at the bottom, right? So that's the way to rule out, right? To rule out alternatives. And one major difference between Singapore and Hong Kong, Singapore manufacturing is still important. And I think the government wants to keep it that way, okay? And then this is Taiwan and Korea. So Taiwan is the service industry is a lot more important as compared to that in South Korea. And also you can tell from the agriculture. So Taiwan, although Taiwan's agriculture is quite famous, but the scale is very small. So it's small scale. Okay, so this is for little dragons. The next one's easier. The two largest economies in Asia. China, India, right? So that's 50-50 chance. Is Vikram here? Is Vikram here? Oh, yeah. So can you tell us which one? Which one? Left one is India, right one is China. Okay, so we get someone who has some inside information. So he's correct. Okay, that's India and China. So again, what I want to show you here is the development pattern. Development pattern is different, right? Even you think of, well, not what I showed you earlier in the bubble chart is the overall economic development and political development, right? But here we look inside the economic environment, and even within the economic environment, we look at GDP composition. It varies by country. Okay, so this is the GDP within across different countries. But here's GDP inside the country. So let's just take China, for example. As we can see here, you can see even within the industrial production, within this major sector, so that's the manufacturing sector, right? So within this sector, the percentage, both the absolute and the relative importance of machinery, automobiles, and computers, this industry has increased relative to foods and textiles. So indicating China is moving towards more value-added industries within the manufacturing sector. Okay, so what I think economic environment, we have lots of information. It's relatively easy to collect information on the economic environment. Sometimes the only problem is to decide which information to choose and which source we should believe. Actually, one of my colleagues in the National University of Singapore, he's an economist, he studied temperature. I was on the research committee, so we go through the grant applications. I was wondering why you want to study temperature. Temperature is temperature, the highest, the lowest, right? To me, it's very boring. But he said, actually, it's interesting. Why? Because temperature is related to the human resource policies. So the temperature can be manipulated. So what he studied is the historical records of the temperature reported by Chinese government and compared that with other sources. He found that actually systematically the temperature was being underreported. And why? Because if the temperature reaches 36 or 37, the workers can go home and they will be given extra compensation. So there's very, very good economic reason to underreport the temperature. So that's part for the economic environment. I think it's easy to get information, but sometimes we need to be cautious as to what kind of information to believe. Okay, now I move on to the next one, which is the political environment. If you compare this to the economic environment, you'll find it's less well-defined and much more difficult to measure. You do not get so many choices of different indicators. So why we care about the political environment? Because this is at the at the background of all transactions, right? And why it will affect the business? Because it will affect the business because the government policy, whether the policy is pro-business or not, this will affect the way we do business. This will also affect business because it creates uncertainty. These policies can change, right? Even today, it's very, very pro-business. Tomorrow, it can become not so pro-business, right? So we're concerned about the uncertainty or concerned about the policy change. So we are going to look at these two dimensions. There are two measures I want to introduce today. One is called the political risk. This measures whether the policy is pro-business or not. And the other one is called the political hazard. This is a measure about the policy uncertainty. So these two names actually I do not like because they sound very confusing. Political risk, political hazard, what's the difference, right? But we need to look at what they actually measure. Okay, so let's look at one by one. We first look at political risk. There are quite a few international agencies. They provide ranking on the country's political risk. So these are some of the agencies, like the Economist Intelligence Unit, the Euro Money, the World Bank. And we all have our usual suspects of countries with high political risk, such as Afghanistan, North Korea, and countries with low political risk, such as Norway, United States. So here are some information I collected from Euro Money. This is a political risk score. They actually also have more recent years, but the problem with these international agencies, they like to change the scale. So even for this one, it's difficult to make comparisons. 1992, the full score is 20. So Australia, 18.4 out of 20, very good. And then 2003 changed to 25. And 2010 changed to 30. And starting from 2011, changed to 100. So that's why I just stopped. Otherwise, we cannot make any comparisons. But here, even so, you can see in general, we have some general, we can have some idea about how pro-business in different countries are. Like Australia is very good, New Zealand very good, Singapore very good. And also some countries considered highly risky, like North Korea, right? And there are some fluctuations, although the scale changed, but some fluctuations, you can see it's a fluctuation, like Indonesia. So if on a scale of 20, it was 12.6, and then on a scale of 25, it's 6.9. Obviously, the managers become more pessimistic about environment in Indonesia. But these things, because this is a survey-based score, what they do is they ask, say, this is a group of international managers. They ask you about your perceptions about different countries. So everyone has different perceptions, right? And the perceptions can be influenced by immediate events. So what happened I suspect that's what happened in Indonesia 2003. Remember 2002, there was Bali bombings in Kuta area that killed more than 200 people. So if you were the manager being asked to do this survey, then you immediately downgrade Indonesia because what happened in the immediate past. So some of the changes may not reflect the changes in the government or in the policy, but it's just perceptions have changed because of some events. But even so, we can see some countries, they have improved their economic environment. So for example, like Cambodia has improved, and the Bangladesh has improved, and India, right? And here is Mongolia has improved over years. So there are quite some countries, and I think Vietnam has also improved. So what I did, I rescaled them, because otherwise we're not comparing apples to apples, right? I rescaled them, but you can still see many countries has improved over the years. But some changes, they can be due to the changes in the political structure. Okay, so that's the next one we're going to discuss. So the political hazard is an objective measure. So that's different from political risk. Political risk, as I said earlier, it's survey-based, based on perceptions. But this is an objective measure, because that measures, it looks at the political system in each country. Okay, so the idea behind this measure is based on group census. So as anyone has experienced, when you have a very large group, it's more difficult to reach consensus, right? The more decision makers there are, the more difficult to reach consensus. And also, this becomes even more difficult if the preferences of these actors are different. Everyone has different preference. I want to do this, I want to do that. And there's a large group of people like that. That becomes more difficult. So that's why here we're looking at two things. We look at the number of political and judiciary levels in political making process and the preferences of actors in political system. So this is the first dimension. So this dimension looks at the number of levels in a political system. So this is a graphic illustration. So you have the executive. So that's the leader, right? Like the president or whoever is the leader. This is the upper legislature, lower legislature, judiciary, and subnational actors. So the more levels there are, the more constraints they are likely to put on the executive. So this is the first one. The second one looks at preferences. So it's not just the number, but whether they have the same preference. So here I use different colors to illustrate the preference of different parties. So we have liberal, nationalistic, conservative, socialist. They have different preferences, right? So when the preferences are not similar, it's more difficult to reach consensus and to think of any new policies. Now I have some examples. So this is an example of a high political hazard country. So this one is only one, no other levels, only the executive. So this is similar to dictatorship, right? So countries belong to this country. The number has decreased over years, but we can still find examples. So that's one example. Everybody knows that's North Korea, right? So we can still find some examples. So another country. So this country, they do have levels, okay? It's different. But some of the levels, they are not very effective. So some, they just function. So this is, you have the legislature, but they just function as a rubber stamp on whatever the executive wants to implement. So here's another country. This is a little bit more difficult to guess. That's China, right? So you do have lots of people involved in the decision-making process, but most of them, they're just like a rubber stamp and just endorse whatever the executive wants to do. And again, the policy can change easily. So here we're concerned about whether policy can change or not, because that creates uncertainty for business. So the next one, so this one, they also have multiple levels, and there is some effective opposition. So here's another country. Which country? That's Thailand. It's, how we can tell, it's from two colors. They have the yellow shirts and the red shirts. So these are the shirts for these two opposing parties. Okay, so the next one, this one has very low political hazard. They have many different levels, and more importantly, the preferences are very different among the political players. So here's one. Which country? I heard some say Taiwan. That was my first guess too. But that's, if you look at national flag, that's South Korea. But for those of you who guess Taiwan, you are not that wrong, because that was my first guess too, and that's also very much fits with the reality in Taiwan. I visit Taiwan almost every year. I think 2 years ago when I visit Kaohsiung, that's the, I think, second largest city in Taiwan, for a conference, the host brought us to Kaohsiung City Council. So the city council, what's the function of city council? The councillors would debate. So the first level of the city council was for them to debate. And the second level, there's an observatory deck with a clear glass wall. And then we can hear their debate through the headphones that were distributed. So we listened. The day we visit, what they discussed was an inquiry by some of the schools for the constructions during the near the school, which inconvenienced the staff and the students. So that was the inquiry. Of course, they want them to stop the construction, and they should delay the construction till maybe the holiday time. Then won't inconvenience any staff or students. So the topic itself was not so exciting, but the way they do it, it's almost like a drama. Okay, they made all of us, we were listening, we felt very touched, and then we wanted to support their appeal. Okay, and also one difference in Taiwan is that here mainly male, but in Taiwan the female parliament members play a more important role, and sometimes are more fierce than the male. I heard stories about how the high heel shoes can become weapons. Okay, so that's why I said that for those who guess it's Taiwan, it's not that wrong. So what's the implication of this, right? We're discussing what's the implication of this. I'm not saying that policy, whether it's certainty or uncertainty, whether it's good or bad. It can be good or can be bad. Because like some of my friends in Taiwan, they also complain. Because yes, it's very democratic now, but so democratic, they cannot agree on anything. They cannot move forward on anything. So when the free trade zone in Shanghai was established in 2013, some of my friends said, oh, we had this idea a long time ago. Actually, China copied our idea, but the problem is they were debating all the time. Even when the free trade zone was established in Shanghai, they were still debating. There was still no action. So policy certainty, it's good in a sense, it's very stable. You have very stable policy environment, but it can be bad when this country cannot change. So this has a status quo bias. So whatever's there, it's going to be there. No matter it's good or bad, it's going to be there. Okay, so that's the implication of the political hazard. Okay, then here again some scores. So this is the measure developed by a professor from Wharton that's called Vitanis. He has developed this measure by looking at these two dimensions. So we can look at some countries, like Hong Kong, I said, they dropped because it's part of China now, right? China is consistently 1. So if we compare this one to the political risk score, if we compare these two, right? Usually we anticipate when a country has low political risk, will have low political hazard. So these two usually go hand in hand. But here we have two unusual, there's some differences. So one is in China, the other is in Singapore. Because China had a moderate political risk because the government has implemented pro-business practices. And Singapore has consistently been ranked as one of the most pro-business markets, right? But they here considered they have relatively high political hazard, which means that the policy can change easily. I think China case is very, very easy to understand. In Singapore, it's a similar case because although there are different levels and these levels are effective, but the preferences of the actors are very similar. So actually nowadays we're discussing today because Lee Kuan Yew passed away early this morning. So there are lots of emails in NUS discussing what's going to happen to Singapore because again, that indicates this high political hazard. If the system is very stable, it's not dependent on one person or one party, we do not need to worry about these kind of issues, right? But now there are lots of emails and it also indicates that the policy is very pro-business, but things can change if something happens. Okay, so that's the political hazard score. So again, I said my talk, the emphasis is on business, right? So we want to talk about what's the implication for business if there's a lack of political constraints. So here I have one case from my textbook. So here's a Hong Kong company called Canton Highway. So this investor, they constructed toll roads in Hebei, 3 cities in Hebei. So we all know how you can get investment back through this kind of, so you collect tolls, right? You construct the toll gates and collect tolls to get investment back. And this is a long-term investment because you are not going to get investment back in 1 or 2 years, probably 20 or 30 years. So that's what happened. After 2 years, after the roads are constructed, then there was some issues with the local government. So the Hebei provincial government, they closed down the toll gates. The government notified the operator by telephone, we're going to close it now, and then start dismantling all the toll booths. And Hong Kong business people, they ask, why? We cannot discuss it now. So this is one case. So if you want to read the details, you can have a look it's in my textbook. But this is a kind of more like a severe case, right? Because why severe? Because the investor basically, they lost all the investments. But there can be also some more mild cases, but again, can have implication on business. So the governments can increase the taxes. They can impose like import to export duties. There are lots of ways they can affect business through policy change. Although this is a more kind of extreme case. Okay, now we have discussed about the economic environment and political environment. But within the political environment, there are other features which I think are equally important. So one is about the lack of transparency. Because information is difficult to come by. The other is corruption, because when the legal system do not promote strong adherence to a nation's set of laws. And finally, it's a counterfeiting products, when the intellectual property protection regime in a country is weak. So I go through each of those. I like graphs, so I have lots of graphs here. So this is the merger acquisition graph of the world. So you can see merger acquisition, we know, comes in waves, right? So this is one wave, okay? So remember, this is worldwide. Now we look at Asia. Similar shape, right? It's similar shape. This is acquisition in Asia. But if you compare the right axis, what's the difference? This 1.2 trillion, this 0.12. So what does it mean? It means the acquisition activity in Asia, it's less than one-tenth of the worldwide acquisition activity, right? If you compare these two graphs, look at the y-axis. But we know the products and services originated from Asia as much more than that proportion. So which means the acquisition activity in Asia, it's disproportionately less active compared to the other activities. And we want to ask why. Of course, there are many reasons. You can consider family ownership, can consider concentrated ownership. We can also cite the ownership by many business groups. These all can be the reasons for this. But one reason, I think, is related to what we discussed, is the lack of information and the lack of transparency in the business environment. Think of you as an acquirer. What information you need to get? And you want to know what's the value of the target company, right? But there's information asymmetry because the seller, they always know more about the company than the buyer. They won't tell you everything. Even if this company has some problem, I won't tell you. I tell you everything's great. So that's typical information asymmetry problem in acquisition. But this has become more difficult in Asia because it's difficult to get information. In other parts of the world, you can get information, but in Asia, it's more difficult to get information. So that also, I think, partly explains why the acquisition activity is not very active in Asia. That's partly due to the environment. And some of you, if you want interested, you are curious, there's a turning point, and that turning point is the Asian financial crisis. Before Asian financial crisis, Asian firms were very confident because they had a very good economic growth. So they were very active in buying foreign firms. And how they buy these firms? They buy these firms using debt. And most of these debts were in foreign currencies. So that's partly triggered the Asian financial crisis. And after that, these firms became very devalued, undervalued, then become good targets for acquisition. So that partly you can also see what's happened through this graph. Okay, so that's the first one. And the second one is corruption. Corruption is very closely related to lack of transparency and also related to the level of economic development. Here I have another world map. It's a different map. So this is a map provided by the Transparency International. So they use different shades to indicate the level of corruption. You can see almost the darker the color, the worse. Okay, so which high level corruption. You can see almost the whole world. It's a corrupt world. With very few clean countries, I think we're in Australia, so it's good. It's yellow. okay? And New Zealand is good. And here, all Asia, I think it's too small. We cannot see Singapore. I believe Singapore is clean. and Taiwan, Japan is okay. But be careful. Some countries, they are so clean, you need to be suspicious. Like, this is North Korea. And this is Afghanistan. They're so white, it's not because it's corruption-free there, because no data available. And no data, what's the meaning of data? No data available, which means lack of transparency, right? So these countries, they should be highly corrupted. So as we can see, this is the 2014 map. Now they managed to get data. So North Korea, it's very, very dark shade red, and so is Afghanistan. So again, this agency, they had to change the scale. The previous map is 0 to 10. This one's 0 to 100. So again, making it very difficult to compare. Okay, so this is about the corruption, which is another weakness in the institutional environment. The third one is about intellectual property protection. In most Asian countries, we all know what's counterfeit, right? Counterfeit is you try to imitate something, but you want to pass this on as genuine. If you try to do the currency counterfeiting, usually the government will prosecute you very severely, and they will treat very seriously. But for other kinds of counterfeiting, some countries in Asia just treat it as business as usual. They do not care so much other types of counterfeiting. And this counterfeiting issue is not just in Asia. This has been spread around the world. And the different countries has developed very distinctive competencies. I heard in Russia, they are very good at counterfeiting software. In Ukraine, they are very good at what's the optical discs. And I won't continue the list, otherwise I may give you some ideas of trips or what to shop on trips. I won't continue this list. But currently, China is the leader, followed by Taiwan and South Korea. And this counterfeiting sometimes not just for the domestic market, it's for export. So I have an example like a New Balance sports shoes. They only found out knockoffs made by its own supplier when they export it to US and to Australia. So they are very aggressive. It's not just for domestic market. They even dare to export, go to the home country of those companies. So here's a picture given to me by a Japanese motorcycle manufacturer. So from the left-hand side, these are the original models. These are the genuine models for Honda models. For each of these Honda models, you can find more than a dozen copies in China. So that's what he collected. And he wrote me a note in Japanese. I do not understand, but I did manage to find someone to translate it. So he said, here's a whole bunch of Honda model copies. The Chinese firms are very good at copying. So this is one example. Another example. So in China, the counterfeiting products, they have a special name. They have a special name. It's called a shanzai. So what's the meaning of shanzai? If you translate it literally, shan means mountain. Zai means village or stronghold. Actually, historically, shanzai was not that bad. It's a metaphor for bandits who want to evade the corrupted authority and do the deeds they think they justify, the deeds they think are justified. So it has a quite good connotation. So many products, they call it shanzai products. You can have the shanzai phone, you have shanzai bag, you can have shanzai many things, okay? So this one is interesting, I found, because this is when the BlackBerry was popular. So they knew that Obama used a BlackBerry. So they have a BlackBerry and the 9500 model. And they put Obama on the poster. And they said, Obama have BlackBerry. We have BlackBerry. So it sounds funny, but we are not sure as a spokesman whether Obama got paid or not. Okay, so you can see how prevalent those kind of counterfeiting products are in China. So why counterfeiting? Of course, the first is greed. It's one of the nature properties of human beings. So we cannot describe as good or bad. And the second, related to industry. we can find those counterfeiting products, they converge on the industries with low entry barriers, like apparel or software. Those industries are easy to enter. And third one, the firm-specific resources. Some firms, they develop this kind of capability to do the reverse engineering and to do the marketing and sell. And some of the firms, they do this so well, then the original manufacturer, you are doing so well, become my supplier. So they actually became the supplier of the original manufacturer. Then, of course, lastly, that's related to what we discussed today. So it's about institutional environment. The lack of an effective formal intellectual property regime. The second one is about enforcement. To be fair, actually, in China, since China joined the WTO in 2001, they tried to strengthen the IPR laws. So these are some of the pictures I took in the Shanghai Museum. So there are posters about we need to protect intellectual property. These are about the penalties if you do not do that. But even so, the enforcement is an issue. Because in US, if you are caught, I think the highest penalty can be up to $2 million and up to 10 years in prison. But in China, if you are caught, probably $1,000, and you can get away with it. And more importantly, many local governments, they do not want to support this. Why? Because they are worried about the local employment. And they are also worried about the taxes, right? Because these factories, they still contribute to the taxes, and they also contribute to the employment. And this is not alone in China. In Thailand, I heard that there's a 2,000 raid on some of the counterfeiters, and then they met with like thousands of angry people organized by the local government. They do not want these counterfeiters to be prosecuted, because this will affect the local economy. Okay, so we already had a look at the institutional environments and what are the weaknesses in the institutional environments, and then what can we do, right, if we want to do business in Asia. So what I want to say is kind of in most mature markets, probably if we understand laws and regulations, that's sufficient. But in Asia, the understanding of laws and regulation are not sufficient. We need to go deeper to understand what are the generation enforcement of laws. So how are laws made and enforced, and what political entities are involved in the process? So not only understand the laws and regulations, but how these laws and regulations are generated and enforced. But also, we know when the institutional environment is weak, there are gaps, and these gaps are filled by relationships. So the norms and standards supplement the rules and laws, and the relationships help to enforce the property rights, contracts, and the laws. So for firms doing business in Asia, the political strategy can become very important. It's not just an additional element to the business strategy. It can be very crucial to business strategy. So here I have some results from my study. And that study was published in the Academy of Management Journal. So I worked this with my former doctoral student, now a 10-year faculty member at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So what we look at is we look at 563 Japanese firms in China over 15 years of time. So we look at how they form alliances with local firms and how they choose their partners. So when you form alliances, you choose partners, right? There are a variety of partners. Some people may assume, oh, I have a local partner, that's sufficient, but it's not. You need to carefully choose whom you want to form alliance and which partner you should work with. So what I do is I look at the institutional environment. And in different institutional environments, you need different partners. So that's what we are trying to look at. So what I look at FDI, because research has shown FDI usually is positive related to the quality of the market, right? When it's a FDI open area or industry, usually the quality of the institution is higher. So I look at in the FDI restricted locations. So what are these locations? I look at the 5 special economic zones and the 14 coastal open cities. So these are the FDI open area. The rest is considered as FDI restricted locations. So I found, so this is the exit rate. This is the exit rate of these firms. So of course, when the firm, they close down the business, that's the indicator, it's a failure, right? Otherwise, why do you want to close down the business? So you can see in the not restricted area, the difference is not that big, whether you have like a local partner, whether local partner has some government connection. But if in the restricted area, which means the institutional environment is very weak, when you have a local partner, so this is the white column, the white column indicates you are not affiliated with the group or do not have any government connection. This shaded column indicates this one has connection with the local government. So why local government is important? Because the local government, they controls the local resources. And most local government, they practice regional protection. So if you have some connection with the local government, this can dramatically reduce the exit rate of the firms. So here are the similar things for industries. So what I look at is whether these industries, they have to enter using joint venture. Some industries, anyone can enter. Some industry, if you want to enter, you have to form joint venture with local firms. So these, I consider them as restricted industries. But here I look at the national level connection, the connection with the national ministries, because industries usually controlled by national ministry. It's not by the regional governments. So the connection here with the national level partner, so when you have a connection with the national ministry, can reduce the exit rate. But also here's interesting to note, when you do not need these partners, if you form alliance with them, this can actually increase your exit rate because there's a cost to everything, right? Most of these government-linked companies, they have government agenda. So if you do not have any strategic reason to form alliance with them, you do not get a benefit, but you still have the same cost. So the cost can outweigh the benefit. So this is my study. Okay, to summarize, Asia has experienced tremendous economic development over the 50 years. So Asia is the place to be in the 21st century. But we also notice that developments vary across countries and industries. And this also affects the changing face of competition, affects the choice of where to compete and how to compete. And I also highlight the development in institutional environment lacks those in economic development, right? In some countries like China, economic development has achieved tremendous growth, but the institutional environment has lagged behind the economic environment. I highlight the 3 areas of weaknesses. So overall, I also share with you some of my findings. So a thorough knowledge of institutional environment in Asia is a good foundation to interpreting opportunities and threats and in formulating strategies in competing in Asia. Okay, so this is more or less what I want to discuss in my talk. But before I conclude, because we're in the Department of Management and Marketing, right? So we want to advertise whenever we can. Okay, so if you want to know more, you're interested, if you want to know more, we have a course, I have a course, right, on Asian management and Asian business and management. And this year this course enrollment in this course has reached the cap very quickly. And our department also has similar courses which also reached the cap very quickly. So for those students, if you are interested, you need to enroll early next time. And for those of you who are like me, we no longer have the privilege to be a student, then we have the center for you, right? So if you're interested, please sign up on the mailing list for the center. So with this small advertisement, I'll conclude my talk and I want to thank you again for participating in this event.
Thank you very much, Jane. My name is Lisa Sargent. I'm the head of the Department of Management and Marketing, and it's a real delight. It was a very informative presentation. I thought we might take a couple of questions relating to Jane's presentation. So if you have got a question, can you raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you.
Hello, Jane. Jane. Thank you for a great lecture. Do you have any comments on the 4 major Australian banks and their leverage into Asia? I think ANZ is the biggest presence there, and the others just sort of wade in and follow. Thank you.
Oh, so you're asking about the Australians' business, their success or any advice for them in Asia? For Australian business, I do think we have some advantages. Because I showed you earlier, Australia and Asia, we do not have any historical backs there. So we do not have any historical issues. Unlike Japan and China, I have one study on Japan and China, the relationship always fluctuates, right? And today we are friends, tomorrow we are enemies. There are always issues. Australia, we do not have this kind of historical backs. But at the same time, I think Australian brands, and it's quite well received in Asia. So these are some of we have some positive affinity to Australian brands. So I think these are some of the advantages we have in Asia. But on the other side, I feel in general our knowledge, that's so far from my 2 years experience here, I feel our knowledge about Asia is still limited, especially for large countries like China, India. It's not just, even today we're talking about Asia, it's not just one size fit all, but when you go to China, India, the within country differences sometimes can be wider than cross-country differences. So I think we need to really understand these major countries more, and hopefully we have our center or our school can help in this regard.
Terrific.
Thank you for your lecture. My name is John Cleary. I'm interested in any views you have on the implications of the one-child policy in China, particularly with the ageing of that one child and the need to look after their parents and maintain life in the workforce, and what that means for China in terms of its economic capability in future.
Okay, thank you for your question. This is a very interesting question, and it's also very relevant. Because the one-child policy, it's actually has been relaxed recently, but the implication is, even if it's relaxed, most people in large cities like Shanghai or Beijing, they do not really want to take advantage of that. Because many people, they feel the pressure of the cost of living in those cities are increasing very quickly, and then they feel they cannot afford to have one more child. But then that does have a very important implications for business. So first of all, it's the increasing cost of labor. The cost of labor has increased a lot, especially along the coastal cities. Like Shenzhen, many factories has already moved from Shenzhen to other areas with cheap labor. The same happened to Shanghai and some other major cities. And the other issue is also can be social issue. Because social issue is, then we all know the little emperor syndrome, right? You have the parents and the 4 grandparents looking after the little emperor, and then there are a series of social issues that can be associated with that. Then also has an issue related to is the labor force. So the forecast that the labor force in China has reached a peak, is declining. So the next one is, I think in terms of labor force, the hope is in India, because in India they do not have that kind of issue. And then finally, there's another issue is about the Asian population. So I have when I was in Singapore, National University of Singapore, I had a student did a consulting practicum on the nursing homes, so for the homes for the elderly. So this can be become a popular industry in Asia, given the Asian population.
Terrific. Got the chance for one more. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Just some quick comments. I think the first one was intellectual property rights. What we found was that you found that you had counterfeiting in your warranty. So apart from the branding issues, you get hurt in your warranty claims by people that make products that look similar to yours, but the quality is much different. So that was the first one. Then on the political risk, I remember the conversation with the party secretary in Shanghai, and he says that, don't worry, we have very good laws. It just depends on how we interpret it. Yeah, right. So I thought that was quite good. But I think going to the first question on finance, we had the first leasing license, joint venture leasing license in China. Oh. And the issue at that point in time was not the ability to get a license, which was very difficult, but the ability to get information on credit risks. Because in China, lending money is very, very easy, but trying to get it back is sometimes challenging.
It's very difficult. Actually, we don't have time. If I have time, I can show the doing business indicator that's by the World Bank. It shows dramatic differences. In some countries, Australia, the credit rating coverage is almost 100%. In some countries, it's 0%. Has also indicator on the if you have the bad debt, what's the recovery rate? In some countries, it's as low as like 15%. So I totally agree with you. This can be a major issue, but again, it's very different across Asia.
Terrific. We'll bring this formal event to a close. I know Jane would be delighted for you to join us and her for refreshments after this presentation. Please continue these conversations as we go to that event. Let me first of all close by thanking you very sincerely, Jane, for a wonderful presentation.